Once there was a time when humans looked up to the skies. As down on the ground, there wasn't much worth dreaming about. It was a time when flying cigars glided through the skies, far mightier than the aeroplanes of today. There has never been a more spectacular way to fly. Soaring up into the sky, man's age-old dream. A balloon slowly rises into the air, a spectacle also for onlookers on the ground. The hydrogen balloon Graf Zeppelin sets off in Stuttgart. A hot air balloon flight brings together the past, present and future of aviation. Looking up, we catch a glimpse of the past. Ferdinand Count Zeppelin. During the American Civil War, he saw how hot air balloons could be used for military reconnaissance. This gave him the idea for an airship. It works like a row of connected hot air balloons. A rigid framework ensures the stability of the structure. A German patent. On the 2nd of July 1900, the first Zeppelin took to the air over Lake Constance. The first attempts faced much scorn and mockery. Gersbeck Castle on Lake Constance. Here the Count developed his ideas. His niece, Baroness Alexa, was able to preserve his study, including a model of the Count himself.
People
thought the idea of building an airship was mad. It could not possibly work. But when he started working on it seriously and it went into construction, they slowly began to accept it and support him. The Count spent his entire savings on building new airships. When the money ran out, he asked the military for assistance. But the generals put Zeppelin under pressure. He had to prove that his airships were reliable.
Wunderbar. Wie ruhig die Motoren laufen.
He finally made a breakthrough with a 24-hour flight. LZ-4, his fourth airship, flew from Lake Constance along the Rhine to Strasbourg. A triumphant journey. However, it came to a bitter end in Stuttgart.
So, mein lieber Dürr, jetzt erst einmal einen kräftigen Schluck auf unser
As he toasts the success of the new airship with his chief engineer, Count Zeppelin hears worrying sounds from outside. The first signs of an upcoming thunderstorm. Soldiers are on duty to hold the airship to the ground, but the Count is concerned that the storm might become too heavy. He urges his chief engineer to rush to the airship and to check the situation themselves.
Kommen Sie.
As they are about to leave the restaurant, a messenger brings bad news.
Reden Sie doch.
Eine Sturmböe.
Already the first gust has destroyed the ship. LZ-4 was completely destroyed. Count Zeppelin is ruined within a few minutes. My grandfather really didn't have any money left. He had already cut down and sold all his wife's forests in order to build the airships. And when the airship crashed in Stuttgart, he had lost everything. But he was rescued by the people of Germany. Millions helped him with donations, and so he started to work again. The original donation lists. People gave whatever they could afford. A total of 6 million gold marks was collected. Enough for a new airship. Never before had ordinary people determined the fate of a technological development. And businesses were also starting to have faith in the success of this new aircraft. The world's very first airline was founded in 1909, the Delag. Before World War I, it offered a regular passenger service in Germany. Airships carried over 30,000 passengers in 5 years, without a single accident. Now the military also sets its sights on the Zeppelin. The First World War. Out of the blue, the army orders an entire fleet of 89 Zeppelins. Their initial task is reconnaissance. Courageous soldiers flew at great height above the enemy and observed the area in so-called spy baskets. The airship remained well hidden in the clouds. Later, the giant ships were also used to launch bomb attacks. They brought death and destruction to Britain. But it soon became clear that the Zeppelins were extremely vulnerable. British fighter planes simply shot the lumbering German giants out of the sky. After World War I, the former enemy was highly interested in the Zeppelins. Hugo Eckener, who succeeded Count Zeppelin in the management of the company, delivered a modern airship to the United States as part of the German reparations payments. Thus, he was able to safeguard the know-how of his experts and many jobs. Two years later, the new airship was ready to be delivered and flew over the Atlantic for the first time. It was baptized Los Angeles. In New York, Eckener received a triumphant welcome. In return for the Los Angeles, he was allowed to set up the first passenger air route between the USA and Europe. The German airships landed at the Lakehurst naval base 70 kilometers off the US coast. There were plans to moor the airships at the highest point of Manhattan, on the tower of the Empire State Building. But this vision never materialized. Other dreams became reality. The airship Graf Zeppelin toured the world, over Chicago, the Alps, Rome, the pyramids. Wherever the giant of the sky appeared, people flocked the streets to see it. In Tokyo, over 100,000 rushed to see the Zeppelin. The airships could transport almost anything, and the passengers were well looked after. Gisela Rabe from Hamburg still remembers her journey to Rio. We're allowed to sit next to the window. We could also go into the pilot's gondola. And when we saw a ship on the Atlantic, as the Zeppelin flew very low, we were allowed to open the window, take a tablecloth, and wave. Not only the German airships broke world records. Spitzbergen in 1926. At several degrees Celsius below zero, the Norge is prepared for takeoff. The polar explorer Amundsen wants to be the first person to fly over the North Pole. His airship was built in Italy. At the helm is the Italian general Nobile. He has promised to take Amundsen to his destination at any cost. Shortly after midnight, the Norge flies over the pole in the brightness of the northern lights. Mission accomplished. But on the way back, there is a gas leak, and they are forced to land in Alaska. The crew survives unscathed, but the airship is lost. Two years later, General Nobile returns to Spitzbergen with the airship Italia, a propaganda mission on behalf of the Italian dictator Mussolini. Hundreds of helpers pull the enormous airship out of the provisional hangar. Nobile is able to drop the Italian flag down over the North Pole. But then a sudden gas leak ends the new mission earlier than expected. The Italia meets the same fate as Norge and crashes in the Arctic ice too. The emergency calls of the few survivors are picked up all over the world. 4 weeks later, a pilot finds the survivors on an ice floe. 8 men are rescued, as well as Titina, General Nobile's dog. Many more experiments end in disaster. The history of the airship is a story of spectacular catastrophes, such as the crash of the American ship Shenandoah. But despite these accidents, more new and bigger ships are under construction. Cardington, a 2-hour drive from London. Here, the English have acquired 2 brand new airships at once, for £700,000 each. They are even bigger and more luxurious than the German Zeppelins.
The R100 and R101, completed in the late 20s, were designed from scratch and intended for passenger service in the British Empire communications system. The R100 made several successful flights through pretty rough weather, including a transatlantic round trip in August 1930 between England and Montreal.
The R101 was built to win over the German airship Graf Zeppelin. The R101 outranks the Graf Zeppelin by 1 meter. That made her the largest airship in the world. And there was a special service, a lift for the passengers. At the rudder wheel, George Hunt.
This is my father, Flight Sergeant Hunt. He was the chief coxswain of the R101.
The crew was famous for their gramophone parties. Mr. Hunt still owns the appropriate title, My Blue Heaven. On board, people even danced to this music. And so they did on the evening of the 4th of October 1930. It was a special day for England and in particular for Lord Thomson, the British Secretary of Aviation. Crates of champagne and large amounts of luggage were loaded for a personal and appropriate start to the passenger service to India. There had been warnings. The new airship had not been sufficiently tested. But Lord Thomson laid his trust in the British engineers. As we know today, the airship was hopelessly overloaded, even if there were only 54 passengers on board. Lord Thomson wanted the ship to go down in history, which it did, quite literally. For Lord Thomson and the other people on board, it was a short journey.
6:10 in the morning, Mother came and woke me and told me that the airship had crashed in France and my father was missing.
The R101 was able to cross the English Channel, but on the European continent, it did not get far. On the outskirts of Paris, the overloaded airship scraped across the ground and burst into flames. All that remained was the burnt skeleton of the airship. Of the 54 people on board, there were only 6 survivors. They were badly injured and were brought back to England. As a young boy, Albert Hunt had to watch how his father and the other victims were buried in Cardington. Since the sinking of the Titanic, no other accident had left such a mark on the country. But nothing could hamper the career of the airship. In the United States, the Goodyear Zeppelin Corporation presents the Akron, the new pride of the American Navy. The Akron was built by a German engineer. One of the first crew members is John Lust.
The Akron was built for what they call a scouting ship. In other words, she was designed to go with the fleet, the surface fleet, and to patrol 1,000 miles further out into the ocean, further than they were, and scout whatever scouting she would do or see, she would radio back to the fleet.
In the 1930s, there was still dispute over whether airships or aeroplanes would take the lead in the future of aviation. Despite the many disasters, airships were considered safe and appeared particularly suitable for long-distance journeys. However, the American military also regarded them as a potential threat. An animation film produced by the US Navy shows a scenario which was seriously discussed in military circles: a German attack on New York. In the film, the German bombers are brought across the ocean on a flying aircraft carrier. The US Navy demonstrated that this idea was not science fiction at all. The airship Akron was built to become such a kind of aircraft carrier. 5 double-decker Sparrowhawks could be deployed quickly and easily. They were transported in the bowels of the ship.
Then they would draw the whole thing in through the hull of the ship into trolleys overhead, hang the ship and put one airplane in one corner. The next airplane would come in, work in the other corner. Now, the next would be this corner, the other corner would be over here, and a captain, the main ship, the main airplane rather, squadron commander, would hang in the center.
The US Navy experiments again and again with a combination of ship and airship. Here, Los Angeles is mooring on a supply unit. The Germans were also advancing with their airship technology. In 1935, rings as large as Ferris wheels are riveted together. LZ 129. The Hindenburg is being constructed. Together with the Graf Zeppelin, this airship is to finally set up a regular passenger service across the North Atlantic. In the 1930s, ocean liners are still the main mode of transport across the Atlantic Ocean. The fastest ships take 6 to 7 days. The Hindenburg is supposed to cross the Atlantic in less than 3 days. The Hindenburg is only slightly smaller than the Titanic. A large aeroplane of our times, like the Boeing 747, appears tiny in comparison.
Wir haben hier 33 Meter von diesem Luftschiff 1:1.
We built a full-scale model of a part of the gondola according to the original blueprints.
Wie es die Fahrgäste erlebt haben, wenn sie kurz
It's in the same condition as the original. Let's go upstairs and board the airship LZ 129. Now we're going up the stairs from B deck to the passenger cabins on A deck, which are all on this corridor, on the right and left-hand side.
Gang alle untergebracht sind, rechts und links. Und
here we have a cabin as it was with fittings for the night. During the day, the upper bed was folded away. This is the little bed ladder. All the fittings are of light aluminium. The sink is made of a very early form of plastic. This was all to save space and make everything as light as possible.
The walls of the passenger cabins are covered with real silk. The guests could take a warm shower whenever they liked. It couldn't have been more luxurious. The food aboard was freshly prepared.
Here the passengers spent their spare time and were served coffee or champagne by a courteous crew.
Champagner von einer guten, benutzerfreundlichen Crew.
The wonderful panorama windows offered a fantastic view.
Für eine Aussicht benutzen hier.
More than 100 passengers are on board. Here the spacious dining hall.
The passengers enjoyed views from a short distance above the ground, a few hundred meters only. It was a journey without any turbulences. For crew members like elevator man Eduard Boetius, there is no better way to travel in the world to this day. Boetius steered the Hindenburg by using simple cable winches and chains, like on a bicycle. But riding an airship was not that simple at all.
For me, the feeling was always transmitted through the buttocks. When I stood at the helm, I felt the movements of the ship in my legs.
Dann spürte ich die Bewegung des Schiffes in den Beinen.
Some mechanics even felt the ship's movements on the outside. To repair a hole in the outer skin of the Hindenburg, they had to risk life and limb. The engine crew had a tough job too. Every 2 hours they had to change shifts. Their workplace was a lonely and noisy one alongside the Zeppelin's grey body. These outer engines were difficult to service, but kept noise at a minimum for the passengers. The Zeppelin airship was a unique success story, the Concorde of the 1930s. No wonder that it soon became a political instrument of propaganda. 1936 saw the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games in Berlin. The dictator Adolf Hitler wanted to present Germany as a world power. The giant Zeppelins were just what he needed for his propaganda. They hovered over major events, here over the Olympic Stadium in Berlin. The Nazi salute to the world was unmistakable propaganda. The Nazis exploited the fascination that people felt for the giant airships. The Hindenburg and the Graf Zeppelin carried the swastika, the symbol of the Third Reich, as far as Rio de Janeiro on their tail fins. Eddy Diekmann flew to Rio on the 31st of March 1936. When we flew over Africa, the people there, who were already used to seeing airships, were so enthusiastic that they splashed water up at us and threw their hats in the air and could hardly contain themselves. The political message from Germany had an effect on the Brazilians too.
It was, of course, a very well-done form of German propaganda. The airship stopped outside the Copacabana Palace, made a sort of bow, and there, between the Copacabana Palace and the beach, stood the Zeppelin.
The most important destination of the German Zeppelins was New York. At a speed of 120 kilometers per hour, it took 2.5 days to cross the Atlantic from Frankfurt. A single journey cost $400, which at the time was 3 months' wages of a labourer. Only the wealthy could afford such a trip. The airships generally ran on schedule. Whenever a Zeppelin came into land in Lakehurst, half the town came together to help out. Hundreds of volunteers pulled the ship the last few meters to the ground. They got $1 per landing. The front of the Hindenburg was secured to a mast, and the rear was kept in position on track rails, for a good reason. The Germans wanted to counter a construction error which had almost destroyed the American Zeppelin Los Angeles. One night, gusts of wind blew the tail of the Los Angeles vertically up into the air. Luckily, no one was on board. The Germans learned from this mistake. Ever since, all of their Zeppelins were secured at the back on rails. In the mid-1930s, Lakehurst was seen as being the airport for the air traffic of the future. The enthusiasm about the conquest of the skies knew no bounds. Every landing of the Hindenburg was filmed for the news. The Hindenburg was 245 meters long and fitted inside the largest airship hangar with only 30 centimeters to spare. At the time, the naval base in Lakehurst was a place known to everyone. Today, it is a sleepy town in New Jersey. Only the stories of its senior residents keep the memories alive.
How are you? Long time no see.
These men were members of the crew.
Under our old ship, huh?
Oh, yeah, that old baby's up there.
In their local McDonald's, there is a mural of the Hindenburg. The swastikas were painted over to give history a nicer look.
I've had a bad cold and it's been getting to me, you know.
In the afternoon, the veterans drive out to their former base. This vast complex is still run by the US Navy, but hardly used today. Once a year, a small ceremony takes place on the spot where, on the 6th of May 1937, the Hindenburg went down on her last voyage. She was several hours late due to a storm over the Atlantic, but the newsreel cameraman kept waiting for her, and their pictures were to rock the world. It was the first disaster to be caught on camera.
The German Zeppelin Hindenburg, queen of the skies, seen here from a universal newsreel camera plane as it sped over New York to its tragic end at Lakehurst, New Jersey, Now lies at the Naval Air Station a twisted mass of metal. Slowly the big ship warps in, and the ground crews rush for the mooring lines. In another 10 minutes or so, the great aircraft would have been snugly docked. But as the passengers crowded the windows to watch, a roar and a burst of flame near the big tail fins turned the ship into a flaming inferno.
Get out of the way, please. It's burning.
Radio commentator Herb Morrison is at the scene and gives live coverage of the disaster.
I told you, I can't even talk to people. His friends are on there. I can't talk, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry.
When the ship had been ablaze for half a minute, it hit the ground. An experience the surviving crew could never forget.
The ship was tilting to one side, and so I flew over the engine, past the propeller, and out the back behind the engine cabin. And then I must have been knocked out for a while, for a few seconds maybe. When I regained consciousness, of course, I instinctively ran off to the side, away from the ship. How I managed to get out at all, I can't remember. But then I noticed that I was losing my grip and I fell. I felt like I was falling forever. I was very lucky that I fell onto my feet in the sand and was able to run away.
Most of us ran towards the ship to see what we could do. And we saw a lot of the passengers and a lot of the crew running out from underneath it. And in my particular area, we got close to the ship and we saw an old couple still in the ship, and we helped them to get out. We also saw the little cabin boy run out from underneath it. He was soaking wet. One of the tanks burst above him and soaked him. And after it hit the ground, we could see him running out from underneath it.
Due to the inclination of the ship, a water tank burst and the water poured over me. I was completely soaked, which probably helped me. I sat on the gangway and opened the hatch, and then I could already see the ground coming towards me. And when the landing wheel hit the ground, it bounced up again and I jumped out. When you do something in a situation like that, the voice of reason might give you some advice, or common sense might tell you do such and such. And that's probably wrong. What your instinct, your will to survive tells you in that moment, that's the right thing.
Thick smoke filled the air for hours. All night, firemen fought desperately against the flames and smoke. 36 people lost their lives. 62 managed to escape from the horror of the flames, many with severe injuries. There is a flurry of flashbulbs as the injured are taken off to hospitals. The photographers even follow them into their hospital rooms. This accident is a true sensation. The day after, the surviving crew members volunteered to fly over the crash site in a small US airship. This is supposed to help them overcome the trauma of the previous night. In the afternoon of the day after, they searched the still smoking wreckage for personal belongings. Eduard Boetius doesn't expect to find anything.
Look what I found at the crash site. It means a lot to me, and I will always keep it as a lucky charm. This was the cufflink that my mother had given to me before I left Germany.
Armed guards patrol the wreckage around the clock so that no evidence is stolen. Rumours spread like wildfire. Was the crash not an accident but a bomb attack? Some newspapers speculate about sabotage. The German ambassador pays his last respects to the dead and visits the injured in hospital. He refuses to comment on what might have caused the disaster. A committee is set up to interrogate the Hindenburg's surviving crew members. The manager of the Zeppelin works, Hugo Eckner, sees his life's work being destroyed. He's convinced that it was sabotage, but does not voice his suspicions in public.
As long as investigation is pending, it is impossible for me to give you any statement or any ideas regarding the causes of the disaster.
This reluctance arouses even more speculation. Some experts blame the hydrogen that was used to fuel the Hindenburg. Others develop theories of a bomb attack. No one can provide any credible evidence. The final journey for those who died at Lakehurst. Thousands come to New York Harbor to bid farewell. Many lift their right arm for the so-called Hitler salute. The surviving crew, among them the cabin boy Werner Franz, accompany the coffins as they are shipped back to Germany.
It was a really bad experience for a boy of 14 years. That stayed with me for a long time. It still feels strange talking about it today.
It took nearly 60 years to finally discover the truth. In the 1990s, a hydrogen expert from the NASA Space Shuttle program went in search of evidence again. Addison Bain had all the means of a modern scientific investigation.
I went back over several hundred eyewitness accounts, and they described the event from a yellowish to a yellowish orange, orangey red type flame. There's a very important point, because hydrogen burns with an invisible flame. But this looks exactly like a celluloid fire, characteristic of a forest fire.
Bain analyzes the last preserved scraps of material from the Hindenburg. In the laboratory, they are tested using NASA's sophisticated technology. Bain can prove that a single spark made the top layer of the Hindenburg paint catch fire, setting the whole airship ablaze. A new paint had been applied to the outer skin of the ship to protect it from the sun. But this paint proved to be highly flammable. Bain reconstructs what happened. At 7:24 p.m, the Zeppelin prepares for landing. But due to a thunderstorm, an electrical charge has built up between the frame and outer skin of the ship. Normally, this is discharged when the mooring lines reach the ground. But parts of the outer skin at the back of the airship remain charged. Several thousand volts shoot into the ground. A spark is triggered and ignites the flammable outer skin. The flames soon engulf the entire body of the ship and come into contact with the hydrogen. This is what then causes the tremendous explosion. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit, the Old Testament says. And a high price they paid for their ambitions. In the 1930s, people still believed that the airship spelled the future of aviation. This dream was shattered in Lakehurst. Only 3 years later, the Second World War breaks out. The transatlantic connection by airship is absolutely worthless. Hitler orders the remaining Zeppelins to be scrapped. The Zeppelin hangars at Frankfurt are demolished. The golden age of the Zeppelin is long gone, but even today small airships take to the skies. In many ways they are reminiscent of the Hindenburg.
Halten!
Have you ever been lifted off the ground by one of these airships? I was pulled 60 meters across the field once. I looked like little green men. It's like a huge sail. 2,000 square meters. When there's wind, you've got no chance.
Riding an airship is a unique experience, say those who had a chance to do it in the 1930s. Unfortunately, these small airships are not licensed to carry passengers. Their cabins are cramped and noisy. Their sole purpose is advertising. They serve as gigantic flying billboards. There is no risk anymore that they blow up in flames since they are filled with helium nowadays, a non-hazardous fuel. For 60 years, it was impossible to dream of airship travel again. But while Addison Bain was investigating the Hindenburg disaster in Florida, some engineers started to dream again. Why should it not be possible to draw on Count Zeppelin's plans? It was time for a revival of the old idea. In southern Germany, the first models are tested in a wind tunnel. The engineers rely on modern aviation technology. The frame may look like the old Zeppelin skeletons, but it is covered with strong synthetic material, not cotton or silk as in the old days. After only 5 years, the new Zeppelin leaves its hangar on Lake Constance. Several years of testing build up new experience. The Zeppelin NT is to take off and land without the large ground crew of the old days. Nobody could afford the 200 people that brought the Hindenburg to the ground. Newly developed side propellers move the airship like a helicopter. The pilot can operate with a joystick. It's a technical revolution that was made possible thanks to the persistence of 24 engineers who did not want to take history for granted. July 2000. Lake Constance in southern Germany. It's exactly 100 years after the first Zeppelin took to the air. Count Zeppelin's granddaughter comes to baptize the next generation of airships. 10,000 people come to see the maiden flight of the world's first modern passenger airship. It is still only small in size, but it has a license for passenger transport. The ship can carry up to 12 guests. They will enjoy air travel in a new dimension. The first passengers can't wait to take off.
When a great old idea gains some importance again in the 21st century, that's terrific. People always look up again in wonder and start dreaming when they see airships in the sky.
On the outskirts of Berlin, a new airship the size of the Hindenburg shall be built. Balloons mark out the dimensions of the largest freestanding construction hall in the world. Here, the company cargo lifter will construct a gigantic airship for freight. Thousands buy into the company's shares. They are truly inspired by the old idea.
I see it as pure adventure capital. There is only a slight risk of total loss, but I think that success is very likely. It's the idea that's interesting to me, a new technology. It's safe and friendly to the environment. Germany will take the lead in aviation again. At least, I hope so.
This man is responsible for the cargo lifter project. Baron von Gablenz, the son of a well-known family in Germany. His enthusiasm is inspiring.
When you look up and see the size of the future hangar, it's difficult to understand how it's going to happen. So some say we are building castles in the sky, others call it a fascinating theory, but we are just doing it.
The new airship has Titanic proportions, just like the Hindenburg. It is to carry 100 tons, as for example turbines and other heavy loads. The cargo lifter has its own crane for loading and unloading the goods. The travel time from continent to continent shall not exceed 3 days. The hangar near Berlin is built to accommodate 2 freight airships. The largest planes of our time look like toys next to the mighty cargo lifter.
Könntet ihr euch bitte mal Helme aufsetzen?
The world's largest freestanding hangar is completed in record time. Every year another record is broken, just as in the 30s. For a few years, the cargo lifter team are the unrivaled pioneers in airship construction. They rake in more and more funds. All in all, 300 million euros. In the year 2000, the hangar is completed, but the airship is still a dream yet to be realised. The deadline for crucial construction elements keeps being postponed, but the show goes on. Investors are regularly invited to great performances. When there is no airship to admire, they can at least get a feeling of the size of the airship. A few months later, the show will be over, and more than 300 million euros will have gone down the drain. Giles Camplin worked for Cargo Lifter until he realised that it would be impossible to construct such an airship.
The group at the top were like a group of students, and the whole thing was crazy. Some of the things that happened were just ridiculous. I mean, it was like a kindergarten. I mean, it was just children playing. They would make a decision one week and then they'd turn it around the next week.
The remnants of a 300 million euro dream. They are disposed of discreetly. On the ground, the deflated outer skin of a test balloon.
What upset us was that we knew behind the scenes that there was no airship. There was no serious design freeze, that the load exchange process just didn't work.
A year later, the company Cargo Lifter is filing for insolvency. Like in the old days, the story of the airship is not only hope and glory, but is also a string of failures. But at least the Zeppelin company has survived, and with it a new airship design that keeps the myth going. Until today, people enjoy seeing Zeppelins glide above them. It's fascinating to marvel at the giant airships. And even luckier are those who can enjoy breathtaking views from above.
I still can't find words for it, as this type of flying is completely different from what I've ever seen before.
Completely safe, not frightened at all.
It's so peaceful, it's fun, especially the views from the big windows. You can observe everything.
There was once a time when humans looked up to the skies, as down on the ground there wasn't much worth dreaming about. It was a time when flying cigars took to the skies, far mightier than the aeroplanes of today. There has never been a more spectacular way to fly.
It's an incredible feeling. From up here you can see the whole area. It's very quiet, of course, very quiet from this perspective. The pilots fly around at a leisurely pace, so you can see every inch of Lake Constance. It's very nice indeed. And Count Zeppelin is always on your mind. You think about what happened in the past, about the accident, and that makes the whole thing a very confusing, but at the same time also a very pleasant experience.